So we sort of conclude this talking about relative truth, valid relative truth and invalid relative truth.
No.
I have to tell you, these are just so you know, like the subject is so vast and takes a long time to really get used to sort of the Indian thinking. And as I spoke this morning many times, and there's a sort of assumption that between the student and the teacher, when they talk about Eastern teacher and a Western student, there's a lot of assumption, especially from the teacher, I think, that the Western student, or the modern student, I should say, think similarly. I think it's not just Western, it's the modern. And actually, you know, I was just talking about the Abrahamic residuals, but actually not just that. Before, I think in India there's also Brahmanic residuals. So there are a lot of Buddhists under Dr. Ambedkar, I mean new Buddhists, who really shy away, I mean if I put it the best way, from the subject of reincarnation. Because the understanding of the karma with many of the Indians may have a lot of Brahmanic residual.
因为了解这个业力呢，对印度人来讲，有很多这种婆罗门教的残余的这种影响。
You know, and it's very sophisticated. You know, like Dr. Radhakrishna, as he said, you know, karma is almost like card game. You know, the dealer will deal you card. That is the part that you don't have choice, and the card that you have the choice of how you play. And the dealer of the card, in many, and again, when we talk about Hinduism, we are generalizing too much. First of all, I'm sure everybody knows Hinduism is a British invented word. I shouldn't say really British. I think they're British. So it's invented word. There is no Hinduism in India. When we study Buddhist philosophy, we have a lot of opponents. There's no Hinduism. And especially after Shankara Acharya, I'm not expert in this. After Shankara Acharya, many of the so-called Hinduism has become very non-dual, so very, very similar. I don't know, maybe we are talking all this, I'm talking too much about these things, which is going everywhere, but there are, looks like, especially if you are referring to older script like Upanishad, there the karma is kind of explained like what Radhakrishna said. You know, the God decides to give you the card, and then that's his right, so to say. You have no choice, but then you play the card. But Buddhists, God will give you the card.
Lord Krishna.
Any God, doesn't matter.
Krishna,
yeah. Maybe Brahma in this case, yeah. And like Kashmiri Shaivism and Tantra, in the Vajrayana Buddhism, very, very, you know, identical. Anyway, Atisha Dipamkara, this was like how many years ago? He's already said there's not many people who can differentiate between this Hindu Tantra and the Buddhist Tantra. But I like to say something which very much connected to what we have been talking. If you insist on differentiating between Hindu Tantra and the Buddhist Tantra, I would say Hindu Tantra is the Tantra that does not have Mahayana and Sharvakayana Buddhism. It's a very important thing. You have to make note this one. Again, I'm talking about, when we are talking about the Vajrayana, we are talking about the ultimate, really very high teachings. But then even the very profound esoteric teachings like Vajrayana will not do without fundamental Sharvakayana. And this all boils down to the union of relative truth and ultimate truth. But invalid relative truth, that's an important one. Maybe we'll just cover a little bit.
可是导世俗这个是很重要的，我们只谈了一点点。
To give you a picture, just very, to make it easy. Let's say you are dreaming, tripping, remember? And you are having a nightmare.
你有一个梦魇
Meaning you are suffering.
代表是说你在受苦。
So your immediate wish is not to suffer. Any kinds of method, either from outside or inside, to wake you up from this nightmare is valid relative truth. I've been thinking about during a break, a good example, but I still couldn't find. In this case, in the dream's case, invalid relative truth can be something like a painted dream, painted nightmare. It doesn't do the job, because here is a real issue. You are dreaming here. This painted nightmare is an extra burden. You don't need this. You don't need to wake up from this. Now, you may think this is the epitome of Madhyamika arrogance. So the Madhyamikan would say something like this, like an Abrahamic God or an almighty God is as meaningless as a painted nightmare. Not just that, all the way to the Chittamata school, that's like really, really high Buddhist philosophy school. Their assertion that the only mind exists, truly, that's also invalid.
这也是导世俗。
Now here, I'm only talking as a Madhyamika student. You can always not agree with this. Because if you have a headache, you need to deal with the headache, not a painted headache.
因为你如果有
This is a big thing in the Madhyamika, especially the Prasangika Madhyamika.
这个是在
Okay. This comes to... But, I want to say this, actually. And I'm not really trying to be diplomatic or anything. Scientists, on the other hand, scientist conclusion, probably I don't think the Madhyamikan will consider them as an invalid relative truth. Many reasons.
有很多原因。
For one thing, whatever the scientists say, they themselves say this is not the final conclusion. And that is a very, very good news for the Madhyamikan. They always like that kind of thing. Chandakirti and the gang, they detest anything. You use an analytical method to find the ultimate truth. And if you find one, they detest. If you find something, they detest. Even emptiness.
甚至空性也是这样。
This is a very big thing for the Madhyamika study system. Okay, how is all this is related to our practice?
那好，现在所有谈了这么多，跟我们的修行有什么关系呢？
From the morning I have been saying, this is where Buddha Dharma excels from many systems. The reason is they do not divorce ultimate truth and relative truth. This is why they can talk about the shunyata and they have no qualms of burning an incense. Absolutely not. They can chant the mantra, no problem. From the ultimate point of view, mantra is a mambo jumbo, incense is a mambo jumbo.
这个燃香也好像是一种欺骗的东西。
Vegetarian is mambo jumbo. Non-violence is mambo jumbo.
素食
I have to say this loudly. Mindfulness is mambo jumbo.
正念修持也是。
It's absolutely mambo jumbo from the ultimate point of view. But if you know how to not divorce them, they all work.
可是如果你知道不怎么把它们分开来，它们都非常有用。
They're usable.
它们可以拿来运用。
And what do you want?
那你要什么呢？
You need a path like a, like a sharpening knife. You need a stone, wet stone, and you need a metal called knife, and then you rub. Metal burns out, wet stone burns out, and imagination of sharp knife arises. It's actually negation of a metal and a stone. But sharp knife works to cut the tomato. And this is what I wanted to conclude with by saying, so with this, liberation is a very important point, so-called liberation, dharma, nirvana. We are talking of liberation. See, again, if you are materialist Buddhist, by consequence, you are not talking about liberation. Nirvana is useless for you. Just wait until you die. It's going to come anyway. You don't have to buy, you don't have to do thousands of prostrations to let the death happen. Then that's the end. Everybody will go through this. It's free of charge.
每一个人都会经验这个，这是免费的。
And similarly, with the same logic, ethic, good deeds, non-virtuous deeds, all this will collapse if you become a materialist Buddhist. Mindfulness is just another tool to make your adorn your life more, I don't know, enjoyable or satisfy your needs. Even Hitler is, I was told, is a vegetarian.
甚至
And I'm sure those snipers, what sharpshooters, snipers, they must have a really good shamatha. Then it's just another tool. Then so-called, then there is no spiritual path, basically. So-called spiritual path has become material path. Spiritual path has become useful for a material gain. When I say material gain, I am saying wanting to get a Ferrari and wanting to have a peace of mind is equal rank. I would sooner get a Ferrari. Mindfulness is just cause of constipation. You know, what's this, all this, like frustration of not being able to be mindful. It will cause constipation or high blood pressures and stuff. Anyway, this is just a conclusion, but it's a little bit like trying to provoke. So now we have a little bit of time, so please, if you have any questions. And there are few, I think this much is enough for today because our brain is too, like sunny side up, stir fried, easy. What is it? Over easy. All of that.
这个对我们
Those who wish to go, please, you can leave. But those who remain, want to ask some questions, please.
就像刚刚教授讲的，请大家的问题可以是一点一点很清楚，而且跟今天的题目有关系的。
Thank you, Rinpoche. This is a question about the efficacy of relative teachings. And recently I've been hearing even Buddhist teachers using the term soul a lot, and I cringe a bit. Just because I think that it's misinterpreted, but then the second question obviously is what's being incarnated. I know there's ideas of alaya and storehouse consciousness and whatnot, but would you speak to a Buddhist clarification of the concept, the kindergarten concept of soul that many of us deal with? Does that make sense?
Yes, I'm so glad you asked questions. I don't think I'll have an answer, but this is a good sign. This is what I'm saying. This is such a good sign. Buddhism is getting matured. We need to talk more about that. And I'm happy that you cringed. That's a good sign.
Thank you, Rinpoche. Earlier you said truth is validated in Buddhism by these four methods. Relative truth. Direct cognition.
Oh, I see, that one. Okay, that's a little different.
Analogy, logic, and the Buddha's words.
Buddha's words, yes.
So I've heard the Buddha's words. Direct cognition is something to work on. Analogy, I've heard analogies like plants, flower and seed, and then the plant is reborn, that sort of thing.
And like a mirage, rainbow.
Okay. What's the logic of rebirth? How is it proven by logic?
Yeah.
Thank you.
在
Where's the gentleman? I need to ask him questions. Can you come here again? Because actually to discuss this need to also define.
I don't want to waste everybody's time with a lot
I
of
know,
talk.
but can you rephrase that word? Did you say exist? What's the logic that there is, or?
Well, you said, if I understood correctly, that truth, relative truth, is validated through these four methods.
No, you are talking, that is a definition of relative truth, but earlier, right in the morning, one way to validate, one system of validation, anything, is based on this four. You are right, you are correct. And you want to know the logic, inferential logic.
Logic, as you however you want to define it. I think this goes to the question of, the very title of the talk was, is there Buddhism without rebirth? And you mentioned at one point, you said something about there is a view that rebirth or reincarnation is irrelevant. I don't know whether that's a materialistic view or an Abrahamic residue view, but I think it's a burning question for me anyway, and maybe others, that if you do good things during this lifetime, and if you try to recognize your own true nature, your Buddha nature, then why do you need to worry about whether you're reborn in another lifetime?
Yeah. I think what you are talking about is to give you the inferential logic to to prove that there is a reincarnation.
说的是说用这个推断逻辑来证明有这个转世。
Well, because okay, here things gets a little complicated. As I said, with this I will use this logic now. Because Buddhists, on the relative level, believe in logic of cause, condition, and effect, as long as there is no obstacle, cause and condition will continue. Marigold, seed, fertilizer, sunshine, everything.
金针花、肥料、阳光，所有一切。
No bulldozer or whatever. Even if you wish, no marigold, it cannot help. Marigold will come.
没有，
This is one of the inferential logic.
这就是一种推断的逻辑。
The logic is so big again in Buddhism.
当然，逻辑在佛教里面是一个更复杂的题目。
Now, mind. See, this is the difficulty with the materialist. We don't have the mutual agreement between materialist and us. What is mind? And when you ask the Buddha, Buddha gave three element definition. And listen to this. This is interesting because it contradicts each other. Actually, it's one sentence.
而且是同一句话。
Mind, there's no mind. Mind is luminous.
心无心，心是光明。
Mind, as if there's mind, he said.
第一个心就好像说有个心存在。
No mind. Now he decided no mind.
然后第二个说无心，那他没有心存在。
And then immediately after that, mind is luminous.
可是他马上又说心是光明。
Okay. Now the Buddhist argument is, this mind will continue, just like the marigold, if it does not meet an obstacle. The mind needs to meet the bulldozer to destroy the mind. Until then, mind cannot be discontinued.
那心，
And that bulldozer is enlightenment.
那这个
When you get enlightenment, mind stops.
当你证悟的时候，心就停止。
That is one of the popular inferential logic many schools use.
那这是一个推断的逻辑。
Yeah. Other than that, I'd like to just remind you everything what I've said, ultimately, no reincarnation or yes reincarnation. There is, ultimately, we don't talk reincarnation or no reincarnation. Relatively, there is a reincarnation
好，对不起，刚刚
as a continuously existing experience. And yeah, then it goes on like, okay, so when you talk about continuously existing, like yesterday's you and today's you, are they the same thing or not? Neither same nor different. Okay.
好的。
Rinpoche, I was curious about how earlier I heard you say, when you were referencing stories of children, let's say, remembering past lives with great specific detail, and you said you weren't so interested in that, but I think I misunderstood the context because I was thinking of, I'm wondering if these examples may still be very useful as a relative method for helping those.
My thinking is they're not the most no need to rely on that kind of very sort of subjective reasoning. And you can talk about the tripping. Remember, this is why I was talking about the tripping and the continuity. But for some it helps. That's okay.
是有帮助的，那没关系。
But many people also don't remember. So therefore, for many, they don't have reincarnation. Precisely using the same logic, we don't remember. There's no proof.
I guess this is related to this. In the preliminary practices, there's the 4 thoughts that turn the mind to the Dharma, and one of them is karma. And oftentimes in this discussion of karma, there's an acceptance of rebirth as being a necessary
Oh yes, very necessary.
relative truth for the full understanding, like in words, my perfect teacher.
Yes, of course. Yeah, there is. If you don't accept rebirth and karma, this is what I'm saying. You are not accepting the valid relative truth. And actually, I have other arguments, with the gentleman earlier and also you. But I'll just mention this, just so that you can think about it. In the Buddhist ear, when you say that there is no reincarnation, that when you die, that is the end, then you are refuting one very important relative law, which is time is relative. Time is relative. Of course, assuming that the materialists are saying that is the real end, ultimate end. If they are not saying ultimate end, again, we have no problem.
当然，这个前提是在说那些相信物质的人，在说这个结束是一个真正的究竟的结束。如果他们不讲是究竟的结束，那我们没有问题啊。
Then actually, there's many many other comments like, if you really believe that when you die, that is the ultimate end, then Buddhists will actually end up categorizing this, who think he's scientists, into the department of almost like a theist, the religious, who believes in like the Armageddon and all of that kind of thing. The end. Kind of difficult to talk these things because, it slips and skids, all this is the logic.
Thank you, Rinpoche. Your comment about a maturing of Buddhism in the West was very striking to me, and I wanted to offer a few very brief reflections. Some of the comments that you made today were made by a couple of other lamas in the Bay Area in 1970 and 71 when I first became a practicing Buddhist. And they were provocative, and they generated a lot of commotion and thinking in the audience. It's so different today. You went to such greater depth, so nuanced, with such complicated, very deep teachings, and the audience, I felt, has really been with you. So that memory from the past and thinking about now was so striking. Another memory that came to me was in 1974, when I watched this very bright, young, energetic Lama of about 13 years old, twirling his rosary and hitting his palms to the examiners at Sakya College at his graduation, when they were examining him for learning about the things that you were teaching today. And to see that, that young boy now teaching the Westerners here in our own language is so wonderful. And the last thing I wanted to share as a reflection is that I've had the privilege of studying with so many lamas over many decades. And most of them do a wonderful job with their students and their particular sphere. But you are very special and unusual in going beyond that. And I wanted to thank you for your leadership and inspiration to try to move along, in your words, the maturing of Buddhism throughout the whole world. And there are some things you've done that are going way beyond the teachings, like the 84,000 Project, to translate the Buddhist words. You know? And also, most recently, what I wanted to thank you for is having the vision to start offering Western-style leadership skills in training to young lamas thinking of coming over to the West. It's so needed. Thank you.
Rinpoche, suppose that when I die, I am reborn as a canary.
Yes.
As a canary. A bird.
Okay.
Now, I do not remember any of my past, I do not remember any past lives, and I doubt that the canary would remember this life. It would just go on with its canary life and concerns. So why should I care and why should the canary care if I'm reborn as a canary?
Very good. Okay, here, before I answer this, can you please hold on there a little bit? This is very important. So important question because of these questions. Because we are talking about, I don't know, sort of like, it's almost like a wait-listed karmic consequences. You know, what is about to come, right? But then the question is, where are they now? Where do they get stored? And it's because of these questions, even the greatest Buddhist schools like Chittamata school, they, in order to answer that, they come up with concepts such as alaya. Because it's really relevant. This is what I said. You really brought a very important subject, actually. I was only talking about, you know, justice, democracy. These are certain value that we treasure so much. And we don't want to let go. And especially, this value is quite an important value. We are talking about the bank, karmic bank. Where does it store? I will really think more to answer your questions in different ways, not right away. Because, okay, right now, just so that you can go back and think that somehow he sort of answered, you know, like.
为了让你回去可以觉得说，好像人们就有点回答的样子，所以要讲。
We are talking about billions of cause and condition. There is cause and conditions that may be brewing that is making you forget or delay a certain consequences. This is why when you are this bird, you are not experiencing it. Okay, I will tell you something. I will tell you something quite very roughly. I will tell you something about the Bardo teaching. I will tell you exactly from the text that is written for, you know, general audience, you know, the farmers, you know, general audience. But try to hear it in a more specific way also. You can. So I will say like, oh, daughter of noble family.
他们就会说这个善女人呐、
you are dying now.
你现在要往生了。
And usually you are now about to die, you know, like, you know, this is where the lamas go, you know, somebody's about to die, so you go there. And say, hey, you know, you are about to die.
他会说，哎，你晓得吗？你快要死了。
But hear it, because it actually is true. We are dying all the time. So on and so forth. And then I will say, okay, after 3 days and 4 days, so you know, there's many, many ways of teaching. After 3 or 4 days, you are, at the moment, consequences. What's your name?
My name is Diane.
Diane. Okay. The consequence of you referring yourself as Diane is still intact. Therefore, you will you will refer yourself as a Dayan. But after 4 or 5 or 3 days, 7 days, 21 days, this consequence, these conditions will diminish. And then the result is you may not remember Dayan. And then if I wave hot dog, you may, because there's still a consequence and the conditions as a human, you'll be famished. Wow, what a juicy hot dog.
可是经过3天、5天、7天、21天、49天等等的，这种结果呢，也会慢慢的这个消逝。
What's the exact half of 49? Mathematicians?
20.5.
24 and a half.
0.5, yeah.
Right. 24, okay. Then I will say, I would even say, hey, daughter of the noble family who for some strange reason being referred as Dayan, I will say something like that. Your previous from Dayan's life, there is a consequences of you becoming canary, did you say? Canary. May be coming. And if I wave a worm, you may get famished. And you may not give a damn about, like jumping from a 20th floor, because you can fly. Canary flies?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. All these, you can listen as a bardo instruction. But you can listen as a bardo being of this. It happens all the time. There must be something right you are thinking right now, which soon is going to go. Soon. And soon you are going to think about something, I don't know what, something hideous, something kinky, something, I don't know, whatever. So on and so forth. This is how practically reincarnation and all this is taught. But we are talking more practical things. Okay, 2 more questions and then I think we should start. Yeah. Okay.
I want to know, do you need faith to be a non-materialist Buddhist?
Non-materialist Buddhist, do you need a faith? You know what Chandrakirti said? Chandrakirti said, to whom should you teach in emptiness? He said, to those whose, the moment the word emptiness is uttered, those who have goosebumps and tears in their eyes, they are the worthy of listener to the emptiness. And then also Buddha himself said, Sharipu, to Shariputra, he said, ultimate truth can be only understood through the devotion of the faith. But again, you need to really hear this properly, because there's nothing that is not faith. The ontologist who believes Pluto exists before us is a faith. That's how dualism works.
这是2元分别的作用啊。
And then, on the more positive side, reason why emptiness can be only understood by devotion, that devotion, when we talk about that devotion, we are talking about, basically, we are talking about non-judgment and complete acceptance, non-judgment, non-duality, again, we are talking about. Okay? Well, last one.
Thank you, Rinpoche, for coming. It was so good it's a blessing to get to hear all the teachings today. I had a question around, I wanted to say back a little bit of what I heard from you and then just ask a clarifying question. So I heard that the division between ultimate truth and relative truth is a little bit of a fantasy, and that ultimately all of this is mumbo jumbo. I loved that, the repeating of the mumbo jumbo. It's that belief is a mumbo jumbo, this belief is a mumbo jumbo. There's something inside of that. And something that really struck home, you said, I hope I got it correctly, is if you underestimate relative truth or overestimate ultimate truth, this becomes a violent path.
Yes.
Which really struck me. And so I guess the question I have is, given that, and I also heard you say that, therefore, given that relative truths are mumbo-jumbo anyways, sometimes they're skillful.
Oh yeah, many times.
And so I'm wondering about if you could speak to what makes reincarnation as a skillful truth more skillful or different from other relative truths, in particular, like women being less whole, or the need to fight for racial justice, or any relative truth that can come up. What makes, if they're all relative truths, if you could speak to what it looks like to navigate discriminating between the utility of those different relative truths as a practitioner who is not, quote unquote, enlightened yet.
Okay. That, is a little difficult to answer because in one way, everything what Buddha taught is a skillful means. But as I laid that example, the definition of relative truth, valid relative truth, one that has the most, or all of, most vivid, most evident, is what makes valid relative truth more valid. Because I don't want you to think that sometimes connotation of skillful means is that it really, it's not this way, but that for the sake of, luring the being, which is, big part is that, but I don't want you to misinterpret this all the way. Because otherwise, again, you'll fall into the same category where some people read partially about like the 14 questions, and then making a complete path out of this may mislead. Okay. Well, as I said, I am a very, honored and really very encouraged to discuss this here in a very important center for learning. Buddha Dharma, I'm a follower of the Buddha Dharma, so I will speak as a practitioner, follower. Buddha Dharma always had so many challenges, external, internal, and some of the challenges are, inevitable. As Buddha Dharma travels to different parts of the world, you have to sort of borrow that culture to interpret, and in the process of trying to do that, sometimes culture and the habit hijacks the truth of the Buddha Dharma. This is one challenge that's going to go on forever, I think.
那这个是一个会持续不断的挑战。
But if some of us can address this time to time, this will actually protect the Buddha Dharma. And I think there's two ways to protect this. One is through practice, and other way is through analysis or academic way. And this is what I was saying earlier, that in many ways, I feel that Buddha Dharma will be kind of protected and with, of course, challenges in the West. Critical thinking and analysis, tradition of analysis, tradition of argument is very valued in the West. But of course, the West has its own history, its own habit, its own culture, and this could always try to come in. Also, you know, it doesn't make sense for many of Western Buddhists trying to become like Tibetan.
同时呢，
There's one thing for sure, in this life, Westerners will never, ever, ever become Tibetan. Chances of getting enlightenment is much bigger than becoming enlightened, about a Tibetan. So there are so many Tibetan garbage, Tibetan baggage that, that also gets imported, and that all those need to be discussed and refined and talked about. And this can be done really quite, meaningfully in the academic world. And I've always been encouraging many young Westerners to really get into Buddhist academic studies in the West. I think it's good to have those hippie-dippy sort of Tibetan kind of look, vegetable soap, all that, malas. It's good to have those practitioners. It's really good to have. But it's really important to have, like people like, Berkeley, Buddhist studies students who would always make noise. Just so, like irritating noise.
同时呢，
I think between hippie-dippies from Santa Cruz and the academics of the Berkeley Buddhist students, I think I can see Buddha Dharma doing well.
在 Santa Cruz 的西皮之间，跟伯克莱的学术之间，佛法会进行得很好。
And I think I will stop here because I, can't think properly now because
我现在在这里停，因为想不清楚了，
we've been talking so much.
讲了太多了。
And thank you so much.
谢谢。
And really, thank you, especially faculties here for
谢谢
letting
这
this
个
happen.
佛教中心的所有的人员。
Thank you.